If I say the name Andy Powell, no doubt the first thing that comes to your mind is, of course, golf buggy. But to me, Andy Powell was so much more than one drunken incident. A big bruising ball carrier who made impacts on the pitch and off the pitch, a humble guy who dealt with issues but ultimately came out the other end to be a bit of a Welsh cult hero. And this is his rugby story. It all started with his hometown club of Brecon RFC, where his explosiveness and size would quickly get him recognised as he moved into the Welsh age grade system. On his way through, he stopped at Llandovery College as well as playing amateur rugby for the Drovers, and in 2001 he signed his first professional contract for Newport, doing pretty well, making 49 appearances over a 2-year period. During this time, at 19, he also got his first call-up to the Wales squad under Steve Hansen, just showing how quickly he was progressing through his professional career. His first time in the Welsh squad, though, wouldn't last very long, as he got quoted in a newspaper saying something along the lines of, "The current outside half needs to be dropped and a new outside half brought in." Not a smart thing to do when you first get in the squad. Hansen then called him into his office and asked him if he thought it was a good idea at 19 to be commenting on who should be selected at 10 for Wales, to which Powell said he actually thought he was right in what he said. So obviously Hansen was not happy with that, and he didn't appreciate it and told him that he knows best as coach and basically gave him his marching orders. Not a good first impression to the Welsh setup. He then decided to leave Newport and look for some different opportunities, but struggled to find a home, having an unsuccessful and short stint at Béziers in France, where on his first day of arriving at the club, he went on a night out to celebrate, and he made the terrible decision to jump in his brand new rental car and drive back to his apartment after his night out. Another thing, not a good idea. In his own words, he then says that during the trip back to his apartment, his cousin, who was in the car with him, for some reason decided to pull up the handbrake messing around. That made him veer off the road, down a bank, into a vineyard. And then he's got stuck in there, so he's driven through a vineyard and come out the other side, thinking, everyone was okay and I got away with it. Thankfully, no one was hurt and everyone made it back to the apartment safely. But when he went to work for his first full day of training, the coach pulled him into his office, showing him the video of the CCTV of him driving through the vineyard. Not only that, but the vineyard that he drove through was actually owned by his new head coach, if you can believe it. I mean, what are the chances of that? So safe to say, he didn't endear himself to his new coach, who fined him his first 2 months' wages, and his stint in France only lasted a year. He then went off to Leicester Tigers, but only made 1 appearance for the English club. He then returned to Wales and he signed for the Scarlets. It seems as though coaches really struggle to work out how to get the best out of Powell, and the fact that he was a bit of a character and liked to drink off the pitch, he started to gain the unwanted reputation of being difficult to coach, which, given some of his transgressions as a young man, you can kind of understand. Lucky for him though, Di Young of Cardiff saw the potential that Andy had, and in the 2005 season brought in the back rower. He instantly hit the ground running and very quickly endeared himself to the Cardiff fans. I can actually remember being at his debut and I remember thinking, where has this guy come from? He's an absolute beast. His all-action abrasive style and his long flowing locks made him noticeable no matter where on the pitch he was. Powell's favourite position was of course number 8, but he also found himself operating quite a lot at 6, as Cardiff had another cult hero, Xavier Rush, who would quite often occupy the 8 jersey. But he didn't let this affect his attitude, and for whatever reason, something just clicked when he joined Cardiff, and he quite regularly started putting in man-of-the-match performances in his first season, regardless of where in the back row he was playing. He quickly began to dispel the notion that he was difficult to coach. Leading up to the 2006-2007 season, he looked a dead cert for international honours if he maintained his current trajectory. Unfortunately though for Powell, he was extremely unlucky as he injured his left shoulder in the pre-season friendly match and would have to undergo surgery to get his whole shoulder reconstructed. And after missing such a large chunk of time from injury, Powell was chomping at the bit to make a big impact in the 2007-2008 season. But often, sport is a cruel mistress, and only 3 games into his return, Powell would unfortunately get the exact same injury, but this time on his right shoulder, which again would require surgery and would need to be reconstructed. It must have been such a frustrating time to be at a point where you're playing your best rugby of your career, thinking Wales honours could potentially be around the corner, and then 2 simultaneous years of the same injury on both shoulders. It certainly takes some resolve to pick yourself up and come back even stronger from that. But come back the big man did, and finally, over the bad luck with injuries, he managed to put consistent performances together for his club and was awarded by Warren Gatland, being called up to the 2008 autumn squad. At 27, he would finally be given an opportunity to make his Test debut, but it was against the ferocious Springboks. I mean, talk about getting thrown in at the deep end. Powell, though, brought his Cardiff form into Wales and put in a vintage performance. He settled into the game pretty early, covering a high kick in the backfield, which no doubt settled his nerves. And from that point, he began to grow into the game, carrying more and more, getting some go forward, using his footwork and agility to move his frame around and break out of tackles. I mean, you can see from this clip the way the South Africans are just flying into him and his slightly upright running style. But he sort of bounces out and spins out of one tackle and goes on to make a bit of yardage. It's a great physical battle and a really fun one to watch. Even though it was a losing effort for Wales, this all-round performance earned him the Man of the Match award and announced him to the wider rugby public. From that point on, Powell was a mainstay in the squad, although at times he did come under criticism. Some people said, although he's a big, strong bruising carrier, his all-round game is just not good enough to represent Wales. I mean, just watching this clip, you can understand why some people are saying this. And though this clip really does literally make me laugh, I can't agree that he wasn't good enough for Wales. He always gave 100% and was always involved in everything whenever he was on the pitch. And interestingly, he said since retiring that while he thinks Gatland is one of the best coaches in the world, he feels like he was forced to bulk up too fast, putting on nearly a stone in just over a month, which is crazy when you think about it. And that hindered his mobility, which you can kind of see when you look at the South Africa game to the next Six Nations. He's a lot bigger and not as dynamic. But anyway, back at club level, in 2009, Andy would be part of a successful season at Cardiff as they reached the semi-finals of the Heineken Cup, and he would come off the bench in the EDF Cup final, which Cardiff would run out comfortable winners, beating Gloucester 50 points to 12. That same summer, he would earn the biggest honour in British and Irish rugby by being selected for the Lions squad that was heading out to South Africa. On the pitch, this was a bit of a strange one for Powell. He would miss out the beginning of the tour due to an insect bite of all things, and from that point, while he flashed at moments, he never completely got into his A game. Where he truly announced himself, though, was off the field, where he was a big character amongst the squad and clearly enjoyed being part of the touring party. When you watch the Lions Raw documentary, the clips that he's in are always the best and the most entertaining parts.
To all the troops overseas, keep on putting up the good work and keep on fighting.
Trying to make peace with you?
Yeah. You know what to do. Keep on fighting. Keep on fighting on that. Oh, boys are cracked now, like.
After the Lions tour, Wales would go on a bit of a lull in 2010 as they tried to rebuild and turn over their squad, blooding lots of new players preparing for the next year's World Cup. This would lead to some poor performances and results on the pitch and would set the scene for one of the craziest games of rugby I can ever remember watching. So everyone probably remembers this game, but in the Six Nations, Wales lost their opening match in Twickenham, and the following week they would face Scotland at home in the Millennium Stadium. Even though our form hadn't been great, we were still strong favourites going into this game and generally performed well against Scotland at home. Powell was starting at 6 in this game because Ryan Jones was captain at 8, which was no slight because how good of a player was Ryan Jones. Anyway, I actually went back to watch this whole game to make this video, and it's literally carnage from minute 1 to minute 80. Scotland take quite an early commanding lead, and that was just mostly down to Wales being poor and poor Welsh tackling. Stephen Jones, though, keeps Wales in the game, knocking over a few penalties, but there's basically no flow to the game, and the handling errors and the passing is terrible and scrappy, and both sides are just all over the place, and there's about 20 scrums which practically collapse on the first attempt every time, awarding free kicks and penalties. Amongst all this, there was multiple clean breaks on both sides. Scotland could have put Wales to bed if Sean Lamont could pass, and there was 2 horrific injuries to Chris Patterson, who punctured either a kidney or a lung, and Tom Evans, who collided awkwardly with Lee Byrne in a tackle, actually broke his neck. And once they opened him up and operated, it was actually revealed that his cervical vertebrae had been knocked out so badly out of alignment that he was millimetres away from being fully paralysed or even possibly death, which I guess is a testament just to how dangerous the game we love is. This would, of course, force Evans to retire, but he did make a full recovery and since has had a successful career in the media, so it sort of ended up okay for him, thankfully. Anyway, back to the game. Heading into the last 5 minutes, Wales were down 10 points, and even though Scotland had a man in the bin, it looked for all certainty that they were going to hold out for a famous win. Out of nowhere, a bit of Shane magic, and Lee Byrne put Halfpenny over the line, and he puts it under the post to make an easy kick for Stephen Jones. Wales just 3 points behind then. Following that, 1 minute left on the clock. Lee Byrne goes through and is one-on-one with Phil Godman, and he's chipped it over the top of the outside half's head, and Godman is actually tripped him up on the 22, and it gives Wales a decision whether they take a penalty or go for the corner with 40 seconds left. At this point, Wales actually make an interesting decision and go for the 3 points to level the score. And, Scotland had 2 men in the bin at the time, and if it was this day and age, you'd expect them to go for the corner and try and maul them over. But they kicked the 3 points, and as the clock went red, it was level. Scotland would be forced to kick off. They didn't know whether to keep the ball in play or to kick it straight out, but they kicked off, and after a few crazy minutes, there was a crossfield kick. Wales nearly went into touch multiple times, but eventually Wales grind down Scotland, and Shane scores a famous try under the post, and it's probably one of, if not the best comeback in Welsh Rugby history. So after such a mental game, you can only imagine what type of night out the squad had to celebrate the win. And after that game is when one of the most infamous rugby stories took place. Now, I'm not going to attempt to tell a story because nobody can tell a story like the man himself. So this clip is from the Big Jim show, and I'd like to thank Jim for giving me permission to use basically this whole clip in the video because it just needs Andy Powell to explain the story. I'll put the link in the description for the Big Jim show, and you can check it out after you've watched this video.
The story to end all stories. I wasn't sure whether to talk about this because it has been told, but I thought for the listeners, one, it doesn't matter if it's been told, but also there could be some new listeners out there. There could be some casual fans that are listening to you.
So I think we got back to the Vale about 4 o'clock in the morning. Can't remember getting back. And you're thinking, you're going to get back to the Vale, you're going to get to your room. But the boys are still drinking in the bar. Gatlin was still drinking. And I can remember Gatlin comes up to me and he goes, "Can I get a cigarette?" So we're having a cigarette outside. Shane Williams, Lee Byrne. And it's like being with your mates. And it was just talking about the game, talking about the night. Oh, how did it go? Can't remember much. Gone back in for a few drinks. I've had to then sponge a fag off Bernie. And Gatlin comes out, he goes, "Can I have a cigarette?" I was the only one outside then to finish my fag off. I said, "I haven't got any fags." He goes, "Oh, go and get some fags." I said, "Drive?" I said, "I'm not driving." But I had that in my head then. So I'd gone to the concierge, back in. I said, "Is there any chance I can borrow the room key so I can take my luggage to the room?" And he goes, "No, I just heard the conversation. You're going to drive." I said, "I'm not going to drive." So I'd gone back to the room, and the night before we'd played Scotland, I was sharing a room with Hooky, and the bulb had gone in the room. So I had a flathead screwdriver. So I'd gone back to the room, got the flathead screwdriver, put it in the ignition, and made my 45-minute journey down the M4 to the service station with my friend beside me. And I can remember junction 32 coming off it, and it started to splutter. And I'm thinking, shit, we've run out of fuel. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're never going to get back. So we managed to get up, pull outside the pump. My mate's gone in for the fags. Lifted the seat up, and then the yellow nozzle started filling up with fuel. And I'm thinking now, sobering up, what the fuck am I doing? And I looked at his nozzle, and it said, "This vehicle is battery propelled." So I don't know where the fuck the fuel was going. And this copper has pulled up behind. And I'm looking at this copper. He's just opened the cap of his car, started filling up, and he's noticed then. And he goes, "And, what are you doing?" I said, "I haven't got a clue." And I've been arrested a few times in my career. I'm not proud of it. And he goes, "Right, put the golf cart on top of the bank, jump in the car, and it'll all be hash, and you'll be fine." So we're going back down the motorway now, back to the Vale, and the copper sergeant gets on the blower. There's somebody going down the M4 on a golf cart. He's causing carnage. You need to stop him. And he said, "And you know what's happening now. I'm going to have to arrest you." So he arrested me. And as we're driving through Cardiff, I've done it once before with a copper. I said, "Is there any chance you can take us through a drive-through, McDonald's?" And people are thinking, "No way." Yes way. So we pull in. He goes, "What do you want?" I said, "I'll have a Big Mac and 20 chicken nuggets." And I know, it's so random. So we get our food. My mate's having food in his back. I've ate my burger, ketchup, dipping the chicken nuggets into the sauce, eating them. And the copper goes, "Do you mind if I have one?" And he picks his chicken nugget out the box, dips it in. I say, "What do you think?" He goes, "Mate, they are bloody lovely, they are." And then, time of the day, get to the station, had a few photographs of the coppers. And then, a cigarette as well. And then they put me in a cell. And I think they let me out 11 o'clock the next day. And turned up back at the Vale. There's a massive wedding going on. And the bride and groom are having pictures on the front lawn. And the bride comes running over. I pick her up like this. And she goes, "Oh my God, it's Andy Powell." And then that was on the front page of the picture the next day. And I get home. It was Valentine's Day, wasn't it? And my mum rings me from London. They'd gone for a big meal with friends. And she goes, "You right, darling?" I said, "I'm fine. I'll always get through it." I said, "How's the old man?" "Well, he just walked up and got out the restaurant." That's typical of my old man. Just walked out. Thought I'd blown it all. Never going to play for Wales again. And then Gatland's rings me. I didn't want to answer it. He goes, "Right, you're going to have to have a little bit of time off. 2 weeks off. You're going to have a ban." And he goes, "Have you decided to go anywhere?" I said, "Yeah, I've already booked." He goes, "Were you off?" I said, "I've just booked Amsterdam." So I went to Amsterdam for 4 days. And I came back more sketchy than I went over there. Yeah.
Now, drink driving is disgusting, so don't get me wrong, I don't condone it in any way, but the way he tells the story is so funny. And I bet his after-dinner speeches bookings went absolutely through the roof after this. And then, from then on in, he would be forever known as that guy with the golf buggy. But back in the real world, though, the police, Wales and Cardiff Blues didn't find any of this amusing. The police would hand him a 15-month driving ban, and Gatland would be forced to kick him out of the Wales squad, leaving Andy fearing that his 14th cap would be his last in red. Back at club level, things were also getting more fractured, and with 12 months left on his current contract, a mutual agreement between him and the Blues would allow Andy to leave the club early, as they felt he'd, quote, lost his way. Even with all this stuff going on, Powell was still at the top of his game and was an in-demand commodity. There were rumours he might return to France with Agen, or even cross codes and switch to rugby league, but instead he decided to stick with what he knew and went to the Wasps where Sean Edwards was coaching, and he would attempt to get his career back on track. In fairness, he would play some good rugby at Wasps, but unfortunately would only turn out 14 appearances for the English club, as again off-field issues caused him trouble. On a Thursday in May in 2011, Powell would go out for 1 or 2 drinks with Wasps teammate Tim Payne and go to watch Cardiff City play QPR at Loftus Road. He likes Cardiff, he's a big fan. As all of us have done at some point, a few drinks turned into a lot of drinks, and a quiet night turned into a rowdy sesh with lots of shots and Jaeger bombs. According to Powell, he would be in the club drinking, singing songs and having some banter with QPR fans. And by his account, he's not really sure what happened, but there was a, quote, kerfuffle. And the next thing he knew, he was on the floor. The Independent newspaper had a quote from Powell saying, quote, "I was knocked to the ground by a gang who then started to kick and punch me. It was pretty scary. I curled up into a ball and put my hands over my face and temples, but couldn't cover the back of my head. I was then hit by a bar stool and lost consciousness. After that, I suffered a pretty bad cut. There was blood everywhere." He then carries on, "I think I lost about 2 pints of blood in the pub and I was taken away in a wheelchair and then taken by ambulance to the hospital where they stitched me up. I needed at least 10 stitches, but I'm okay now. I am feeling sore all over, but it was just one of those things." End quote. Powell told the police he didn't want to press charges and just wanted to move on from the situation. And it does seem like the situation wasn't actually Andy's fault, but going out on a heavy session on a Thursday before a big game on the weekend is not a good look. Compounding the issue was the fact that the Friday morning after the attack, Andy decided to discharge himself from hospital and instead of going home, went straight to the pub at 9 a.m. and started drinking again. I mean, come on, like... While at the pub, Sean Edwards rang him to see how he was, and although we don't know the details of this conversation, I'm pretty sure we can guess roughly what was said. Almost immediately after that, Wasps terminated his contract, and after a year, he was looking for another club. But, to be fair, he wouldn't have to wait long, as Sale Sharks almost immediately snapped him up. Given all this upheaval, Andy's performances on the pitch never seemed to dip off, and Gatland showed some trust in him, naming him in the World Cup squad, where in the warm-up matches he would score his one and only international try against Argentina. By this point though, Wales had brought through a new, young, exciting crop of players, and any Welsh fan who's a similar age to me can remember the emergence of Lydia, Warburton and Faletau as a new, exciting back row unit. But with an injury to Ryan Jones, Powell would make appearances off the bench in all of the group games of the World Cup. But unfortunately for him, he would get left out of the knockout games once Jones was fit and returned to the bench. Powell would be forced to watch from the stands as Wales were just edged out by France, and even though he was probably as fit as he's ever been in his career, he probably realised that his international career was coming to an end. Back at club level, though Sale would struggle at the beginning of the season, Powell would impress the Manchester locals, but would still manage to find some controversy, this time on the field, as he was fined £5,000 for swearing and making hand gestures during his team's loss to Bath. In 2012, he would make his final appearance in a Wales jersey, coming off the bench in the Six Nations against Scotland, ironically the team that were the genesis of his famous golf cart story. Despite really enjoying his time at Sale and playing some of the best rugby of his career, he would make another interesting move by deciding to switch codes and go and play rugby league for Wigan Warriors. This actually wasn't that much of a surprise, as throughout his career he'd been linked and approached by various clubs at various times to make the switch to rugby league, and a lot of coaches saw his potential with his physical, dynamic ball carrying ability, and when you actually take into account his strengths and weaknesses, you would imagine that he really could have made a good career in rugby league if he'd pursued it at a younger age. This journey would only last a year though, playing 5 times for Wigan and twice for South Wales Scorpion. He since in interviews admitted that he really struggled to find his place in league, and when he was on the pitch he was doubting whether he was good enough to be there and just had a general lack of confidence that he definitely had in Union. In 2014 then, he would head back to where his professional career started and sign for the Newport Gwent Dragons, playing 10 games for the Welsh team, though at this point he was kind of past his best. So it had sort of come full circle, and though he'd been around the houses, he would end his career back in Wales. Before retiring though, he would make one more surprise signing as he headed for Merthyr, who had recently received a large amount of financial backing and were bringing in a lot of big names in the Welsh Premiership. Unfortunately though, injuries and mental health would finally force Powell to retire, and since retiring he's openly admitted that over the last few years he really struggled with depression, knowing his rugby career was coming to an end, and he really struggled with coming to terms with that instead of enjoying the last couple of years of his career, and he spent a lot of time worrying about what was to come and sort of drowning his sorrows on a much more regular basis. He's also opened up about his struggles with gambling, and when he was making large sums of money at various times throughout his career, he would always end up gambling it away. At one time, he recalls winning a bet for 90 grand, which is insane. His gambling addiction would come from a young age, where his granddad gave him a tip on a horse as a teenager, and it ended up winning him a couple of grand. This gave him the bug, and it was something he struggled with throughout his career, openly admitting that though on average he was earning over 100 grand a year, he basically blew everything. And I'm not bringing all this up to sort of throw him under the bus. I thought it was important to put this in because I think it's very brave of him to come out and admit that he had an issue. And this might help people who are struggling to open up and talk about this addiction, because it's really difficult. And I think it's a good thing that he's openly talking about it. Thankfully, though, since having a family, he's got himself help and managed to kick the habit. So well done to him. On a lighter note, a few years after retiring, he would get his first coaching job at his former club, Brecon RFC, where he would have a very successful few years in charge, getting them promoted in the second season and taking them to the Welsh Plate final in the Millennium Stadium, in which they ended up winning. So it just shows that it doesn't just have an amazing prowess as a player, but there's also a lot of potential as a young coach. He now makes his living by coaching, after the dinner speaking, and, quote, doing a bit of graft at his local building firm, which by all accounts he loves. He's also done a lot of podcasts, and I have to say I've had loads of fun listening to them. Some of the stories he comes out with are just crazy, and he's a really good storyteller and just seems like an all-round good bloke. Now, people only tend to remember that insane golf buggy story, and I think that's where his cult hero status largely comes from. But I think it's important to point out what an amazing and decorated rugby career he had. He played for 3 of the Welsh regions, 9 different professional clubs, most of Wales' age grade teams, including the Sevens, 23 caps for Wales, a year in rugby league, the Barbarians, and of course the Lions. I mean, when you read that, it's actually undeniable what a career he had. Like, there's not many people who could read out that list of achievements. And cult heroes like Andy, who can drink midweek, have a couple of fags on the weekend, and then still go out and play man-of-the-match performances against the best sides in the world, don't come around very often. So I hope this video has played a small part in taking into appreciation how much of a legend Andy Powell actually was. Thanks for watching.